So at Pages, we had this very bright team, had a lot of conflict between them. And as I think I mentioned, Rick Gessner had some actual training in conflict resolution, so we did some team discussions to try and change how we would disagree with each other, the sort of language we use, which was actually quite effective. I credit Rick fully for helping to save the team. The other thing we did is I did an offsite with the team. It's always nice to get offsite. And this was rented a conference room at a hotel that was near the beach. And we sat outside. And I had a big, what's the word I'm looking for? Whiteboard. Well, actually it wasn't a whiteboard. It's with a sheet of paper.
Overhead.
Well, no, not an overhead, but big pad of paper on a stand, so I could write stuff down. And what we did is I asked each of the engineers, why are you here? You all accepted jobs to come here via Pages. Why did you come? What is it you hope to get out of this? And as each of them answered, we wrote them down, and they were there for very different reasons. You know, some I wanted to build something cool, some were like I wanted to be part of a startup, some were I wanted to win the geek lottery and, you know, get rich. We put them all down there, and then the exercise that didn't take terribly long, but then I said, okay, so what should our team goals be that will help each of us individually to meet our individual goals? And that was an interesting discussion. That took a couple hours. And we did a lot of refining, a lot of back and forth, a lot of talking, but finally came up with a set of, as I recall, and again, this is 25 years ago? 25 years ago. It was about 1992. Came up with a set of team goals that we all agreed to as a team, and we could all see that if we achieve these team goals, each of us would achieve our individual goals, or at least have a good progress towards achieving our individual goals. And then we said, okay, how do these team goals relate to the company goals? Because at this point, all we're really considering ourselves as an engineering team. And so we did some discussion as far as, because, there were other employees, we had a company, we had investors at this point. And it's like, how do these work? And we did some more adjusting and tweaking so that we were very clear that our team goals supported the overall mission of the company, but we're also clear that our team goals supported the individual goals and aspirations of each of the team members. And that was a very powerful experience, because at that point, each of us could see, here's what I'm hoping to achieve. The team is in support of this, and by the way, this will help the company to succeed. I have since run across other sources that have basically described the same method. This is something that we came up with, but it wasn't unique to us. I've seen this documented elsewhere. This is something to keep in mind, because you're going to find yourselves at different points in your career in high-stress situations with teams, with forces that are threatening to tear your teams apart. And this is a process to help to try and keep the team together, to help unify. We're going to talk more about teams later on. In fact, I skipped we're going to talk about team-aside later on. DeMarco and Lister talk a couple chapters quickly on how teams gel, but then mostly talks about all the things that corporations do to destroy teams. Their comment in those chapters is, we don't think that the organizations actively set out to destroy teams, they just act that way. and you'll find it's true, sadly. Any of you have team experiences that sort of relate to this, as far as either teams pulling together or falling apart? Here, one second. Oh, yes?
Well, at my internship, I was curious as to kind of how the team was structured. And basically the manager told me that their goal was to make sort of like a team and basically like make sure everyone was on the same page. I thought it was interesting kind of connect to this, like that same idea of like, we want everyone to have like this goal, like you have your personal goals, but then also like our team goals that are all practicing.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
At this company I was working at, the COO wanted the team to go one direction with technology, and we got a couple members of the team who wanted to go work with that technology to advocate very strongly and argue for that. And then the CTO wanted the team to go a different direction with the technology. And the team kind of fractured where they were gossiping about each other and talking smack behind each other's back.
Yeah, that's sort of the opposite of this. This is dividing a team and having, and this is actually why part of the power of this approach is that the team organizes themselves as a team independent of the company. Because this is a case where basically you've got the CO and the CTO are having a pissing contest, and they're basically trying to get the team members to align with one or the other. We're back to team-aside. You know, this is how you destroy teams. Any other comments or questions on this? Okay, Conway's Law. And I will apologize again in advance. Been teaching this course for almost 3 years. I can never remember what stories I've told you, which ones I haven't, or in what detail. But I've talked about Fannie Mae going in and, yes, I did tell you about the $500 million project. This was supposed to take 2 years and $180 million. When they called me in, it had been going on for 4 years. It's been $500 million. They had no code for production, ready for production. It was depressing professionally. And part of what I was trying to do is figure out what's the architecture of this overall system. Well, of course, one of the first questions I asked was, who's the chief architect? And the answer I got was, there isn't one. Okay, big ding, 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 you know, big red flag. That's actually one of my standard questions when I go in to review a project. First question is, who's the chief architect? Who has a conceptual unity? We're going to talk about that in a week or two and why that's so important. Well, the problem here is there was no chief architect, and this was spread across, much like your story with the CO and CTO, this was spread across 2 or 3 divisions, each of which had its own priorities and goals, and they didn't have architects either. And this is an old Windows screensaver. This is what kept coming to mind as I was trying to actually draft the architecture. Seriously, this is pretty much what it looked like. You had all these pipes. You had this data that was supposed to be flowing from the banks to Fannie Mae, and eventually to mortgage-backed securities. You had these different divisions, and instead of being a nice, clean flow with any sort of standardization, it was all over creation. It was divided up. I had this grid of boxes, and I had different colors. And it basically, things didn't match up at all. There was a reason why there was nothing in production. There was literally no coherent architecture to the system. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, what year was it when you went to do that?
That was in, I want to say about 2004, 2005. So.
How close it was to the crash?
The subprime crash? Yeah. I can talk at length about a number of things there. And also the crash of Fannie Mae. I can talk about that, which was separate from the subprime crash. That was due to financial shenanigans, which I can talk about because I know about them almost firsthand. Anyway, but the whole problem was that the architecture, such as it was, did reflect the organization, which was this incredibly disjoint organization spread across multiple divisions, multiple groups, and so on. And you had sort of these pipes that were being taped together to flow data from one part to another. So, it's Fred Brooks coined this in Mythical Man-Month, after someone he knew, named Conway, which is generally an organization that designs a system will produce a design that reflects the organization. It's why you may end up changing some of your org charts If you look at your org charts, that's what you're building. That's sort of your architecture. And if it's not the architecture you desire, then you may want to relook at your org chart and the communication systems. So, that's Conway's Law in a nutshell. Like I said, this isn't a long lecture. Any thoughts or observations, any experiences with wildly disjoint architectures because of organizational problems? Yes?
How do you fix it?
You reorganize. You basically say, you decide first what you're building, you need the conceptual unity, and then you say, how do we set up the organization and communications channels to reflect the architecture. It's why so many of you in your org charts, you've already done this. It's like, well, we have a front-end team and a back-end team that are talking to each other. It's because you're developing a system with a front-end and a back-end. Yes?
If you're in like a very large organization and it's pretty embedded, do you stop production and reorg the entire organization? Or do you continue having pieces working on certain things while you're doing this reorganization?
I would reorganize the development team towards a desired architecture. Now this is not, you don't necessarily, you're talking about the group that's actually doing the development. So you're not necessarily talking about the whole organization, though you might be. And that was one of the problems with Fannie. One of the problems at Fannie was that instead of building a team specifically designed for this project, they simply pieced it out among different divisions. And you had basically, that was a recipe for disaster. And that's what they had. They had a disaster. $500 million, nothing in production. My understanding is I don't say this necessarily with pride, but after my report, I spent 3 months there leading a team, issued a report. It got in the hands of the CEO and the CIO and the senior vice president in charge of the project were both fired. Because it spent $500 million and really had nothing to show for it. My understanding is some bits and pieces finally went into production, probably after another couple $100 million. It was a major fiasco. Yes?
Something that's come to mind in this is just the idea of communication and how vital communication is in between teams and people and stuff. And I'm curious if these same problems we're seeing in, project architecture or computer sciences also seen just as commonly in construction, for example. Or I'm curious if they've managed to solve that problem because they've been able to have people who communicate better or better structure. I'm curious if it's applicable across all business or just in our industry in particular.
Well, that's actually an extremely good question. And construction is, as an expert witness, I usually rely upon construction analogies because most people don't understand information technology, be they judge or jury. But most people understand construction. You know, they have watched buildings being built. Some cases they've had houses remodeled or houses built. Right now, I live, literally, my wife and I moved into a brand new house and we're watching houses go up around us, and I'm utterly fascinated to notice the starts and stops. It's like there's a big team in here and they're pouring concrete and they're doing all this and they get the houses framed and then suddenly nothing happens for like 4 weeks. And I don't know if that's a cash flow issue, if it's a coordination issue with the things. Now, the difference is that construction has been going on for thousands of years. There is an extremely, extremely solid body of knowledge of civil engineering. Well proven, well tested. You still have construction disasters, you still have construction projects that go bad. But it's great knowledge. Now there's a classic quote from Jerry Weinberg, who I've cited here before, who says, if contractors built buildings the way programmers build programs, the first woodpecker who came along would destroy civilization. And it's a real issue. You have this visibility problem with software architecture and structure. Building under construction, any of us, could walk up and say, yes, I can see. They have the foundation, they have, bare walls up, they've got windows in place. but you know, gaping holes where the doors are still, and you pretty much can get at least a sense of how far along it is. Non-technical people have no way of doing that with software. And frankly, most of us have a hard time. Because you go back to armor. You don't know what you don't know yet. And if you still have invention that has to go on, it's kind of like trying to build a building where you have a fog of war about any area of ground that you haven't actually built on yet. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's a 50-ton boulder right here. It's going to take us 3 weeks to dig around it and get it hauled out. That's the sort of thing you run into software. So that's why it makes it so hard. But no, you have many of the same problems. The difference is in construction, we've been doing it for thousands of years. We have very well worked out methods. And construction very seldom involves invention. This is precisely why, particularly back in the 90s with the advent of object technology, you had this great surge. Software components, we're going to build software components, just like you have drywall and various things that you use to build buildings, and we'll just construct software out of the components. And the problem is that it doesn't work that way. We're back to the core issue. If it has value, it involves invention. If it involves invention, you're doing something new, and you don't know whether or not you can do it. You have a question, or you're just twirling your pen? Okay. So that's the challenge. I mean, it's an excellent question. Like I said, people, it gets back, I think I mentioned to you that one of the problems with software is that you can make it look far more finished than it is. If I produce a scale model of a building and show it to you, saying, here's what the building's going to look like, you don't say, great, let's move in tomorrow. But if I use all the nifty interface tools and mock up the whole user interface of the program and show it to manager says, great, let's start using it tomorrow. It's like, well, no, this is just a facade. I haven't done anything behind it. But look, you have all the menus, you have all the commands. Why isn't this working yet? And I think I've mentioned here that for years I wanted to have like a quarter scale computer and use that for demonstrating software. Say it's going to take us 6 months to get it to run on the big computer. So, which is silly, but that's pretty much the gap between construction and information technology. Okay, negotiations and love songs. This is something that I really need to get back to. I was struck watching A Beautiful Mind. The story, yes?
Do you want to take roll?
I'll do it after this lecture and before the second one.
Sounds good.
Thank you, but thank you for the reminder. By Nash, Jonathan Nash? Huh? Yeah. Brilliant mathematician, did some pioneering work in game theory, and I was watching it, and they were talking about one of the game theory things. I thought, oh my gosh, this is like programming. Because you have parties with very different expectations. You have the engineers, us. You have the managers who are paying for all of this and what they want, and you have the end users who are actually going to have to live with the software. And a lot of the problems that occur with software projects is that the three groups can't agree on what they want, or what they expect. Or as I say here, they can't even agree on what game they're playing, and therefore what victory is. And you get, how many of you have been in a situation where you're trying to get something to work properly and management is saying, we don't care, just ship it. And you're saying, no, you don't understand. If we ship it like this, it's going to cause problems. It's really going to make our users angry. It's like, we don't care, we need to ship. Any of you been through that? I have. Got some head nodding over here, yes. Be aware that this will be an issue. You will have disagreements between yourself, between those who are paying the check and those who will actually use the software as to what it should do. I've already mentioned here that I have on multiple occasions encountered the phrase among end users being presented with this new, improved replacement system. We want it to work just like the old system, but better. Now that's actually an oxymoron. But users hate change. They hate change. How do you feel when you get an update to Android or iOS on your device and they've changed something? And your reaction is, why did you do that? The old way was perfectly fine. Why are you making me do this? When we shipped Pages, I brought the manual in, by the way. We'll talk about this next lecture. Groundbreaking, design-oriented desktop publishing. All this intensive, we had a world-famous typographer as one of the founders. We had this professional graphic designer who used to work at CBS as one of the founders, and so on. We shipped 1.0, and you know what the feedback we got from users was? We want WordPerfect key bindings. Someone wanted Emacs key bindings. We want a ruler. I mean, this is design-oriented. It's basically trying to guarantee that anything you do will always follow good graphic design principles. And one of the biggest requests we had is, we want rulers on the columns of text that we can futz around. And you know what we did? We implemented all that. I think it was painful to the company founders, but the simple truth was, that's what the end users wanted, and it basically made the complaints go away. And also you'll find there tend to be conflicts. Okay, how many of you have encountered the perennial battles between engineers and sales? Okay. I have had literal shouting matches. And this is with people I like and respect at Pages. Our VP of Sales and Marketing, Rand Schulman, went and demonstrated our software to this international law firm and came back and told me, well, we told them we could implement X, Y, and Z. And I said, Rand, we can't implement X, Y, and Z. He said, well, I told them that. I said, Rand, we can't do it. Not unless you give us 6 months and a lot of money. Don't promise stuff that we can't deliver. And he'd already told him, oh yeah, sure, we can do that. There is a old joke in the industry. What is the difference between a used car salesman and a software salesman? The used car salesman knows how to drive and knows what he's lying. So the software salesman usually knows how to use the software and often does not know when he's lying. Any comments or questions, any feedback, any personal horror stories you want to share here? Yes.
Our last company, we weren't allowed to talk to sales about anything. Because if we mentioned that we were making something, they would be like, oh, it's almost ready, it'll be here any day. And it's like, the designers are kind of working on it, like maybe in 6 to 8 months we'll be doing it.
And that's a brilliant example. I mean, they were very smart to say, no. You can't talk to sales because as soon as they think, they hear some vague rumor of a feature, it's like, oh yeah, we can do this already.
Yeah.
Any other? Yes?
The company I worked for said that in their early days, they'd have teams that were just for when their sales would go to clients, and the client would say, I want this feature, and they'd say, yeah, that's almost done, it'll be out in 2 weeks. And then they'd give the feature to the team to do in 2 weeks.
Anyway, yes, I think you had it.
So where I was working at this summer, so there are some connectors, some integrated connectors that we had that we stopped supporting because nobody was using them. So we decided to spend time focusing on stuff that we're actually using. And later on in the summer, they told the project manager, oh yeah, we have some clients that started using those a couple weeks ago. But there had been updates that we had made on the back end that changed how everything worked, and so those were breaking and they were really mad
Yep.
at us.
A case I know of where I worked on as expert witness, I will stand off all names to protect the guilty. Major software sale from an international software company to a major corporation here. But they were taking software from overseas for a domain that they had not yet actually had any sales for here in the United States. The salesperson put together a canned demo showing features that were not available in the software and demonstrated it to the customer and said, this is off the shelf. She made the sale and got a $1 million bonus for doing so. The actual implementation project was a failure, and the software company ended up settling for $100 million. There is a reason, and part of it was frankly the fraud in sales. There is a reason. Why you don't talk to sales? There's a reason why you don't let sales oversell your stuff. Yes.
In that case, for that salesperson, is there a repercussion when they get caught with fraud?
I don't know what happened to the salesperson at that point. That wasn't my particular role. I don't know if the company made her give the money back. I don't know if she just went off somewhere else. You know, on the one hand, the software company doesn't want to acknowledge what she did. So if it goes after her, it's basically tacit acknowledge that she did this. And again, she wasn't all by herself. She had a support staff, and you know, the whole thing was reviewed within the company and saw it. So they can't claim, well, she was a rogue salesperson, because she basically sold it on this basis, and the whole company signed this, you know, multi-$100 million contract to sell the software. And it was a tremendous failure, cause loss for the original company and the customer company, and they turned around and sued, and the software company settled just to avoid even greater damages. Okay, let me, I think that's, oh, Mythical Man-Month, Chapter 10, Documentary Hypothesis. Short chapter, key points are here. First is that there are a small number of documents. Most projects, and trust me, when I do system failure projects, there are usually hundreds of thousands, occasionally millions of pages of documents. What I find is that there's usually a very small number of documents that tell me all I need to know about the project. This is pretty much what you're doing in this class. You're creating a small number of documents: org chart, roles and responsibilities, requirements, schedule, architecture, test plan. And the reason you have these documents is, first, the act of actually creating them causes you to force decisions. You're going to find this with your requirements. There is this requirements explosion that happens when you go from sort of the broad to the implementation specific. It's like, well, if we're doing this, it means we have to do this, and we have to do this, and we have to do this, and we have to do this. So there is a reason. I'm not a fan of massive documentation. I am a fan of targeted documentation because it does force these decisions. And saying that manager will be constantly amazed by policies that he took for common knowledge are totally unknown by some members of your teams. Folks, read the documents your team produces. I've had a number of conversations with teams and team members over the past 3 years where there were members who really had no clue. Oh, that was supposed to be developed? That's why you're putting this down in actual deliverables on your project wiki site. You're all responsible to read the documents that your team produces. And by reviewing them periodically, which you should do, even within a short time frame, See what change of emphasis or shifts in direction are needed. You know, the old maxim is no plan of battle survives first contact with the enemy. Well, the same thing is pretty much true with requirements in architecture and development. As soon as you start developing, it's like, oh no, this isn't going to work, or we have to do this differently. It's worth, one of the reasons why I tend to emphasize keeping your documents simple and clear is to encourage you to go back and revise them as you need to. It's much easier to revise a 10-page document of requirements than to revise a 100-page document of requirements. Not that you have time to do a 100-page document, requirements document, or would want to, but it's easier. Keep it simple, keep it focused, keep it straightforward, and use it to communicate within the team. Any questions or comments here? No? Okay. That's it for the readings. Let's take roll real quick here. And then we'll talk about creating your requirements document. Stop the